This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I'm your host here for today's edition of the show, the Sunday edition of the show, and we have a pretty jam-packed coronavirus branded show, pretty much. Everything we're talking about today is pretty much coronavirus related. Sorry. It's kind of the bigger news stories of the day, or that's just the nature of them today. So we'll talk about what the return of the NHL could look like if they do return. The Bundesliga, I think I said that correctly, is back starting their season there. Questions that need answering for college football to return. The NFL proposal to increase diversity, and then of course our NFL draft review for the Miami Dolphins. But first we're going to talk about the MLB medical safety rule. So the MLB came out with a proposed protocols, a 67-page document concerning health and safety that Major League Baseball delivered to Players Association on Friday night. So the procedures outlined in the document are subject to union approval and could change, of course, but this is pretty much a good roadmap of what a coronavirus Major League Baseball in America could look like. So, of course, we have Korea, we have Taiwan. Those two are playing. They have their own things. They have no fans, of course, and they have their own rules in place. But those countries are in much better shape when it comes to coronavirus than America is. So it's very interesting what we're looking into. So here's a quick overview of it. There's different sections. So the first section we're going to talk about is testing, which is arguably one of the more it's more than likely one of the more important ones to cover. So, regular testing for all players, managers, coaches, and umpires, plus a limited number of essential staff members who come into close proximity with the players. The MLB will monitor developments in testing and attempt to use the least invasive and fastest methods commercially available without adversely impacting public health needs. Vast majority of the tests will be run on saliva collections through oral or nasal swabs. All players must undergo intake screening upon arriving at spring training. The screening will take place at multiple locations and at staggered times, consists of a temperature check with a contactless thermometer and a body fluid and blood samples. Individuals who are tested must self-quarantine at his or her spring training residence until the results of the testing are reported, likely within 24 to 48 hours. Asymptomatic individuals undergo temperature checks and symptom screens at least twice daily. An individual with a temperature above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, other symptoms consistent with COVID-19, will be subject to immediate rapid diagnostic test at a location close to the club facility. Each club will maintain a dedicated testing area in its spring training site and MLB ballpark. Free diagnostic and antibody testing is available to individuals who live in the same household and healthcare workers or other first responders in the club's home cities as a public service. Each individual will conduct daily home screenings that include a personal temperature check each morning. Clubs will provide these thermometers. Before entering a club facility, individuals will get temperatures checked and a complete short symptom and exposure questionnaire. Any individual who reports COVID-19 symptoms or a temperature above 100 during a home screen will not be permitted to enter a club facility. Makes sense. All this kind of makes sense. So clubs must take the following steps to minimize potential transmission, identify all players and other employees who have had close contact and closely monitor them. Team physician may determine some or all of those who should get tested. Immediate cleaning and disinfecting of all club-controlled areas, and reinforce the importance of hygiene, which I feel like we shouldn't have to reinforce that, but whatever. So moving on to spring training, what is spring training going to look like? Limited to 50 players per club. Clubs that conduct spring training at major league parks, workouts should be staggered throughout the day to avoid overcrowding. When feasible, clubs should consider the use of another facility, such as a nearby college or minor league stadium, to conduct workouts. Reporting dates are staggered, with camp divided into 3 phases. So you have the individual and small group workouts consisting exclusively of pitchers and catchers. Then you have larger groups permitted for workouts and intra-squad games, still staggered throughout the day, and limited number of games. To address heat concerns, spring training games in Florida and Arizona would begin between 7 and 9 p.m. local time. And then you have 4-person umpiring crews would be used, with the possibility of adding a 5th using multiple plate umps when temperatures reach certain levels. So, facility protocols, facilities were restricted to limited groups of essential personnel, players and other on-field personnel, etc. Minimum standards will be maintained for cleaning and disinfecting. Processes will be in place for safely distributing meals and dietary supplements and medicine. Communal water and sports drink coolers are prohibited, which that is an interesting one. Only personal water or individual prepared sports drink bottles or contactless water dispensers with disposable cups should be used, which that is very interesting because, you know, they usually have the Gatorade coolers and stuff like Gatorade jugs and stuff like that. So that's going to be interesting to see how they go through that. No spitting, using smokeless tobacco, and sunflower seeds in restricted areas. Good luck with this one. I heard this one earlier today, and of course I was like, that's going to be the tough one right there. Because baseball players, they love their sunflower seeds, they love their tobacco. That's going to be a very difficult one. Any physical interaction such as high fives, fist bumps, and hugs must also be avoided at club facilities. Don't tell the Atlanta Braves. They're all about the hugs. So increased availability of hand washing and hand sanitizing stations. Players and other on-field personnel should wash or sanitize their hands after each half inning. Where possible, clubs will make efforts to reduce the density of individuals. Meetings will take place virtually when possible. Lockers should be 6 feet apart. If not possible, clubs should erect temporary clubhouse or locker facilities in unused stadium space. Showering will be discouraged at club facilities. The use of indoor batting cages is discouraged. Pitchers will use a personal set of baseballs during bullpen sessions and separate balls to demonstrate pitching grips or mechanics. Oh man, this is a lot. Only necessary players in the dugouts. Inactive players may sit in auxiliary seating areas, including adjacent in-stadium seating to maximize physical distancing. Dugout phones will be disinfected after each use. Group dining is discouraged. Saunas, steam rooms, hydrotherapy pools, and cryotherapy chambers are prohibited as well. So on-field operations, there will be no exchange of lineup card exchange. They'll be put into like a phone app. When the ball is out of play or in between pitches, fielders are encouraged to retreat several steps away from a base runner, which that sounds hilarious to me. Catchers are permitted to step on the grass toward the mound to give signs if he needs to stand. If he needs to stand to relay signs to infielders. Non-playing personnel must wear masks at all times in the dugout, and spitting is prohibited, which once again, good luck with that one. And then you have travel, where teams should control their environments as much as possible. Whenever possible, teams are to fly into smaller airports. Players will not be officially quarantined. Members of the traveling party are not to leave the hotel unless they receive advance approval from team personnel. On the road, players should essentially isolate at hotels with precautions such as prohibiting buffet-style meals in place. Luggage will be sent directly to players' rooms to avoid extra touch points. At teams' home cities and in spring training cities, players can stay at their desired locations as long as they follow best practices. So, these are the general rules. There's some pictures that involve, there are pictures that kind of better illustrate how the MLB wants everything to go. I mean, in my opinion, these are good proposals. It might be a little much. Some of it might be difficult to follow just in general, so I don't know how that's really going to work. The spitting is going to be the real thing that's going to be difficult, because first off, do you punish them for spitting? Like, how does that all work? How are the punishments going to work? All of that is very interesting, and we kind of need answers to that. But when we come back, we'll talk about what the return of the NHL, the National Hockey League, could look like if they come back. When we come, and we will come back and talk about that when we come back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
We talked about on the Thursday edition, we talked about the AHL canceling their season and how that could potentially be what the future of the NHL is this year, canceling their season. Well, there are signs that are continuing to point toward the NHL eventually returning to play later this summer. But there are, of course, some questions in that, just like every other league. There are some questions into that. And hockey is one of those strange sports where there's a lot more touching and a lot more camaraderie between players and stuff like that. There are a myriad of moving parts that you need to go through to find the fairest and safest way of resuming the season. Do you just go straight into the playoffs? It's kind of like the NBA. The NHL and the NBA are in the exact same situation. You've heard me talk about it plenty of times so far, as we are in day 70 plus or whatever without sports, and I've talked about this at least 10 times. So what will a return to play look like for the NHL? We talked about what the return to play looks like for the MLB, as they are much closer to coming to playing a season, but we'll see. They're trying to move from a theoretical scenarios that dominated early discussions. They're trying to figure out a final plan and an obvious path has not presented itself yet. Here's a look at one model that, according to multiple sources, has been given a look by both sides. Whether this turns out to be the final model adopted by the league is unclear, but it gives an idea of how many of the many moving parts that are part of the discussion at this stage of the proceedings. First, like a lot of how the NHL has approached the uncertainty presented by the pause in the season, the situation regarding plans for a return to play has been fluid. Initially, league leaders were determined to complete the regular season, which would have meant finding a way to bring all 31 teams back to hub NHL centers in cities that presented as the safest possible locations. Initially, having all 31 teams involved was believed to make the most sense in terms of recouping some of the up to $1 billion in league revenues that were outstanding when the league paused competition. But logistics, including a comprehensive testing plan and pushback from some teams with no hope of making the playoffs, has seen the league and players move away from that plan in the past couple of weeks. Now, it appears as though the focus is on moving straight to a playoff competition with an expanded field of teams to reflect the closeness of the standings at the time of the pause. An expanded playoff grid would also take into account the fact that teams had not all played the same number of games when play was halted. So more teams, especially from bigger markets, would also help the league's bottom line. So, what would it look like? Last Thursday, it was reported that this remains a point of discussion for the league and the players. Multiple sources have indicated a 24-team model that would look something like this has been very much the front burner. 12 teams from each of the two conferences would gather in 4 hub cities, 6 teams per city. Each of the 4 divisions would be gathered in one city, with a couple of exceptions based on winning percentage at the time of the pause. A number of GMs have indicated they don't think teams would be able to play in their own city if it was chosen. So, for instance, if Toronto was a hub city, as might be the case, the Leafs and the Atlantic Division teams would play in one of the 3 other cities to kind of try to keep it fair, I suppose. No home field, home ice advantage, I suppose, in that situation. Regardless of where the games are played, the Eastern Conference would look something like this, with the Atlantic Division having the Atlantic Division hub, Boston, Tampa, Toronto, Florida, New York Rangers, and Montreal. The Rangers, who have the 11th best winning percentage in the conference, would cross over from the Metropolitan Division. The Metropolitan Division hub would include Washington, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Carolina, New York Islanders, Columbus Blue Jackets. In the Western Conference, it would look like you have the Central Division, which is St. Louis, Colorado, Dallas, Nashville, Winnipeg, and Chicago. Chicago is the 12th ranked team by winning percentage at the time of the pause. So, and the feeling for many is that the top team in each conference should be grouped with the bottom team. The Blues are a top-ranked team in the West. Then you have the Pacific Division hub, which is Vegas, Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, Minnesota, and Arizona. So if the teams that are cut off, they were teams that had no chance of making the playoffs. So that's why they got, cut off. There seems to be a near universal agreement that, along with an extended period of on-ice training, some are predicting up to 3 weeks of on-ice training to get everyone back into shape. It is impractical to simply begin with play-in elimination games. Also, players and coaches from top teams have been clear they don't think it's fair if there was a bye for them while other teams are playing meaningful games if that type of system was implemented. So to give all teams time to get back up to game speed, multiple sources indicated that this 24-team model would begin with a round-robin style lead-in to the playoffs, with each team playing the other teams in its group for 5 games. Given no travel and expanded rosters with recent cancellation of the American Hockey League season, this could be accomplished in about 8 or 9 days. So if you use points percentage from the round robin combined with the regular season points percentage, the top 2 teams in each divisional group would be given a bye, and the bottom 4 would play a best-of-3 series to create the traditional 16-team playoff field, with the third-place teams playing the sixth-place teams and the fourth and fifth-place teams facing off. There is a model for the results from the round robin for such a field, and came up with these final standings, which the final standings, these are the projected final standings if we have a round robin. So in the Atlantic, you have it would be Tampa Bay, Boston, Toronto, Montreal, New York, And then Florida, in the Metro, would be Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Washington, Carolina, Columbus, New York. These are projections, of course. These are not how they're going to be. So this would leave Toronto, Montreal, and the New York Rangers, Florida, as the best of 3 matchups in the Atlantic. Pittsburgh, Columbus, and Carolina, New York Islanders in the Metro. Over in the Western Conference, you have the Colorado Avalanche, St. Louis Blues, Dallas, Nashville, Chicago, Winnipeg. In the Pacific, you have Vegas, Arizona, Calgary, Vancouver, Edmonton, and Minnesota, which would end up so the round-robin games, as set out here, are important in that it allows the players and the league to get a feel of the routine of playing in centralized cities before the introduction of elimination games. Everybody get back up to speed, back up to game speed, and stuff like that, which makes a lot of sense. It's critical to competitive balance. There's been some pushback from some quarters on having teams like Montreal and Chicago obvious sellers at the trade deadline in the playoff tournament. Is that fair? And if it's not, would having a 20-team tournament create more competitive playoff experience? By dropping the 11th and 12th place teams from each conference, you could then run a similar model, although that would mean losing 2 big market clubs, such as the New York Rangers and the Montreal Canadiens. In this case, Columbus would move into the Atlantic Division hub, and in the Western Conference, the 20-team model would mean dropping Arizona and Chicago. In that case, you'd likely swap Minnesota and Winnipeg to ensure the top and bottom teams. St. Louis and Minnesota were still in the same hub in the West. So a 20-team playoff would look something like this, with Boston, Tampa, Toronto, Columbus, and Florida in the Atlantic. In the Metro, you have Washington, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Carolina, and New York. Central, you have St. Louis, Colorado, Dallas, Nashville, Minnesota. Pacific, Vegas, Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, and Winnipeg. So then you could play a 4-game round robin in each hub, which could complete in 6 or 7 days and accomplish the same thing in getting teams up to game speed while establishing the next phase of the playoffs. If there were 10 teams per conference, only the first place team in each divisional setup would get a bye. Then a play-in best of 3 would feature second versus fifth, third versus fourth, and then you arrive to the traditional 16-team playoff tournament. So parts of the rationale behind having a hub season is to eliminate travel, which would increase the odds of positive tests. Having 16 teams in 4 cities allow the first 2 rounds after the round robin and the play-in to be played without travel. One source familiar with the process suggested that instead of having the conference finals in 2 cities, the return to play committee will name one hub city to host conference finals and the Stanley Cup final to reduce travel even further. So the NHL has been fielding calls from teams and politicians at the state and provincial level whose cities might be suitable hosts. That list has apparently been narrowed down to Toronto, Vancouver, Edmonton, Vegas, Dallas, and Minnesota being considered the front runners. So it is believed the league is looking at 4 rounds of best-of-7 series after the round robin and play-in series, although that too remains part of the discussion that will precede a formal announcement on just how the NHL hopes to get back on the ice. So the NHL has a kind of interesting way. They usually do have interesting ways of doing things that other leagues aren't doing. So that is a very interesting way of potentially doing the NHL playoffs. So NHL playoffs are one of the most exciting playoff formats in sports. So anything to have the traditional 16 best-of-7 series would be great. So get it done, boys. When we come back, we'll talk about the Bundesliga, which, once again, have no idea if I'm saying that correctly. I also know nothing about it, so we're going to learn a lot about that when we return.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, You'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All eyes will be on the Bundesliga this weekend. They were on the Bundesliga this past weekend as Germany's top flight becomes the first major European league to return during the coronavirus pandemic. So, they did it. I saw people tweeting about it. They played early in the morning, Saturday morning. They played early in the morning, Friday morning. No, not Friday morning, but they played early in the morning, Saturday morning. I saw people tweeting about it. I know very little about the Bundesliga. I know, Bayern Munich, I know them. I know Dortmund. I had a roommate who liked them back in the day. So, I know a little bit of it. I don't watch soccer. I definitely don't watch European soccer. I don't watch the Premier League, or I don't watch any of that stuff. So, Bundesliga is definitely new to me. But it is the first major sports league in the world to come back. I'm not counting NASCAR. I'm not counting UFC. I'm talking about first major big sport to come back. So, I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, people actually watch this. I mean, Korean baseball was cool, but like the majority of Americans don't watch that. A majority of Americans probably don't watch the Bundesliga either, but more probably watch it on a regular basis than Korean baseball. So, let's talk about what this season could hold for the Bundesliga. First, we're going to talk about the unbearable heaviness of being Bayern Munich. They are the team that cannot lose. We're not talking about minuscule probabilities here. Even though 7 titles in a row would suggest as much, but a moral imperative, Bayern Munich are football's Howard Ratner in Uncut Gems, never satisfied with what they have. They're always hustling for the next big take. They win by winning all the time. In the Bavarian capital, lifting the league trophy isn't the culmination of dreams and aspirations. It's mere survival. Everything else is death. This is very dramatic. Just gotta say. No club have more fans in Germany and more anti-fans who take umbrage at their relentless success than their unrefined brashness, their total self-absorption. What they do at the weekend consequently affects more people than any other side might, and explains why their travails never cease to dominate the airwaves in the self-enhancing storm of noise and money. While for Bayern supporters it doesn't get much better than a sense of relief or quiet satisfaction, everyone else can take great delight in the existential pain they experience after a 2-2 draw with Augsburg. Bayern are ever only one game away from total crisis. You might not like what you see, but it's quite impossible to look the other way. To make matters more fraught, even winning is sometimes not enough. Niko Kovac's domestic double in his first season in charge did little to allay dressing room doubts that Bayern's success had come despite the Kroat's best endeavors. Not because of it. He was let go in November after one of the poorest first half of the season runs of the decade. Under Hansi Flick, the team has since refound their tactical identity as one of Europe's most accomplished possession sides and given neutral viewers a second compelling reason to tune in. The sense of moral hazard and potential for limitless schadenfreude aside, they're seriously good as they have been since Pep Guardiola ruled the roost 4 years ago. Dortmund, another shot at making history. German's second biggest powerhouse, have enjoyed a rare few months of relative stability. Only 3 years ago, the whole team narrowly escaped a financially motivated murder attempt, and Thomas Tuchel's reign ended in unprecedented acrimony. The following season, Dortmund chose not one but two unsuitable coaches, Peter Bosz and Peter Stoger, and in 2018-2019 was a spectacular implosion, having led the league at Christmas. Lucien Favre's men stumbled from one defensive calamity to another and finished runners-up behind Kovac's rather humdrum Bayern. That failure to capitalize on the serial champion's weakness didn't produce nearly the same fallout as it would have done in Munich if the rules had been reversed. Favre kept his job, no important member of the squad left, but half the team's top reinforcements joined. Half a team of top reinforcement joined. They had veteran defender Matt Hummels, Julian Brandt, Thorgan Hazard, Giovanni Reina, and teenage goal machine Erling Haaland. Add the likes of Marco Reus, Ashraf Hakimi, Axel Witsel. These names can't be real. Like some of these names just can't be real. And a certain Jadon Sancho to the pot, and what you have is a side that can mix it with the best of them. Grandmasters tomorrow, superstars today. A league that prides itself on the involvement of fans and stadium experience will have to narrow its focus onto the players in the next few weeks. Luckily for the Bundesliga, the 2019-2020 crop is sufficiently stellar to warrant the extra bit of attention. At Bayern, for example, we're witnessing the emergence of a young Canadian, Alphonso Davies, as one of the most exciting left backs in world football. In front of him, Thiago's passing excellence is coming to the fore once more, thanks to Flick's more structured approach, and it's been a joy to see Serge Gnabry grow into a seasoned performer alongside the indestructible goal fiend Robert Lewandowski. Portman's aforementioned forward line reads like a who's who of 2024 Ballon d'Or candidates, while the less intricate but by no means less impressive RB Leipzig boasts forwards Timo Werner, Patrick Schick, Christopher Kanoku, or Nkunku. Midfielders Marcel Sabitzer, Konrad Laimer, and defenders Ibrahima Konate and Dayot Upamecano. These names can't be real. I'm just saying. If you watch the Bundesliga, I am butchering these names like no other, because what are these names? These names are crazy. So the Bundesliga's monopoly on live football provides an opportunity to appreciate their otherwise more easily overlooked talent alongside those of an increasingly fluid Bayer Leverkusen side. Kai Havertz's status as the crown prince of German football has been reconfirmed since the winter break, but he's being helped by the fact that Boz's side can also rely on the pace of 20-year-old French winger Moussa Diaby and the finishing skills of Argentinian Lucas Alaro. In addition, newly recruited central back Edmund Tapsoba, signed from Guimarães in January, has been a revelation. Watch him to understand why the Burkina Faso international will be coveted by the elite over the next couple of years. So, a bunch of butchered names, talking about things I don't know. Soccer's back. That's all I can really tell you. German soccer is back. I know Dortmund and Bayern Munich, they are the top dogs in this league. But if you enjoy soccer, this is here. And it is very important that soccer came back. Germany, They have a stranglehold on live soccer, live sports in general, because I know a bunch of people who are Premier League fans, but the Premier League's not going on, so they're probably going to tune into this. I believe this is on Fox Sports. It's going to be broadcasted on Fox Sports, I believe. So, I mean, just saying, if you're awake Saturday mornings, just act like it's Saturday morning cartoons and you're a kid. Just wake up and be like, oh boy, sports. I know some people, especially in America, they can't stand soccer. But soccer is a very beautiful game. I personally just can't get into it because there's so many leagues and I can't get into, like, I try to get into MLS, but I can't get into MLS because I don't understand. There's some things I don't understand, but which can be solved just by, basic research. But it's just one of those things where you either have to go all in on it. You can't just be a casual viewer of soccer, and that's my big issue with soccer. You can't just be a casual viewer. You have to either go all in or be left behind. And that's kind of how soccer works, in my opinion. You have to go all in. You got to follow MLS. You got to follow the European leagues, Premier and Bundesliga. You got to go all in if you want to try to follow soccer, because the players can go all over the place. Then you have the national teams, which have the same players and stuff like that. So I don't know. I might be talking out something. But that's how I feel about soccer. It's very kind of hard to get into, but there's nothing else on. So, good thing we have soccer, which is something I never thought I would say ever. But here we are. So when we come back, we'll talk about questions that need answering for college football to return. We've talked about the return of college football a couple times, but we need some answers, and we need some questions answered. If I could talk when we return.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
College football, it is so important to a lot of people in this country. More specifically, it's very important to a certain sector of this country, which is the Southeast. Of course, in the Southeast, these states are starting to open up a little bit more. Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, they're starting to open up a lot. Florida is pretty much welcoming sports leagues with open arms because, it brings revenue and stuff like that, brings attention, pretty much. So these states, they are all aboard the open back up, the world, end quarantine, end isolation. They are all for it. And definitely one part about it is definitely college football. Now, we've discussed before, SEC schools are starting to come. They said they're going to be back for in-person instruction in the fall. We've discussed how it would work if, say, in the ACC, all the schools are ready to go except for Boston College and Syracuse. The ACC said, we'll just play without them. So there are other questions, of course. There's other questions, of course. For instance, like, how long would it take for teams to get ready? Like, when does this decision need to be made? That's the main question I have right now. When do we need this decision to be made if we're going to start up or not? So the general consensus among coaches, athletic directors, conference officials, and NCAA officials is that football teams would need 6 weeks to prepare to play a schedule that begins for some with Week 0 games on August 29th. 2 weeks of those 6 would be spent doing off-field workouts. The other 4 would be the standard preseason camp, which is even more necessary for most programs because COVID-19 lockdowns wiped out spring practice. So to have 6 weeks prepare, some teams would have to come back together 2 months from today. How does that happen? ACC Commissioner John Swofford put it quite well Thursday. There just aren't a lot of answers at this point in time. To get the answers, you have to identify the questions. So we are going to identify some questions. So the first question, relatively simple. Will teams be allowed to gather? This will require an agreement within conferences and from officials in various states. For example, SEC teams are banned from participating in on-campus workouts through at least May 31st. Big Ten teams have a moratorium that lasts until at least June 1st, when school officials have discussed returns. They have referenced these dates, but their words frequently have been reported as expectation that in-person on-campus workouts will resume the next day. That usually hasn't been the case or the speaker's intent. SEC presidents are scheduled to vote on that league's moratorium next week. They can allow it to expire, which would allow teams to return to campus June 1st. In states that would allow such gatherings, or they could extend it to give themselves more time to determine testing protocols before players return. Mark Emmert, the NCAA president, said there likely won't be any sort of blanket return date because different states are in different situations, so the return dates likely will be vary by conference and within conferences by school, and as states go through the process of reopening. In the SEC and the Big 12, where states in the league's respective footprints seem to fairly align with the subject of reopening, this may have more of a uniform feel, but that seems unlikely in the ACC, Big 10, or Pac-12. The ACC has a 10-state footprint. It includes Georgia, the state that began lifting restrictions in earnest in late April. You have Florida, who has allowed many non-essential businesses to reopen, but hasn't quite gone as far as Georgia has. The ACC also includes New York, the state hardest hit by the pandemic. The Big Ten stretches from Nebraska to New Jersey, and like the ACC, its states cover the entire spectrum. In the Pac-12, Arizona's stay-at-home order expires Friday, this past Friday. California, meanwhile, it isn't using a one-size-fits-all approach, but restrictions remain stricter in Los Angeles and in the Bay Area, where the league's 4 California schools are located. All these leagues could conceivably wait until early July to decide whether players can return to campus. By that time, state restrictions could look different, but we just have no way of knowing right now. So what happens if some teams can play and some can't? To this point, American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Arisco has gone farther than anyone on the record in response to a question about this potentially explosive topic. Given the geographic spread of several leagues, it's quite possible a few will have schools that are capable of getting football underway, while others may not be allowed to gather or to practice. This isn't the NFL, where the commissioner could simply order teams and states with restrictions to take up temporary residence in states with fewer restrictions. If one or several teams in a league can't play because of local restriction, the league may have to decide whether to play on without those teams, and such a decision would not be taken lightly. So what if, for example, 10 teams in our league can play and 1 can't? What if 9 can play and 2 can't? We're going to have a long discussion with our ADs about this, but the sense I'm getting is that we would play if the vast majority of the teams can. That's Aresco. We've discussed that a couple weeks back when this topic first came up. Thursday, ACC's John Swofford said his league has not drilled into the fine details of that potential quandary. He said, I don't know what the threshold is on that. We haven't really reached the point of having that discussion. I'm sure we will in due time as to whether it's 3/4 or 2/3 or 50% or whatever it might be. But I don't think some schools not being able to compete necessarily keeps the majority of schools who would compete from competing, but it's premature to answer that question at this point. So the 2 Power 5 leagues that are most likely to get the go-ahead from their states first, the Big 12 and the SEC, are the most likely to have all their schools aligned in the same situation. The ACC and Big 10 could find themselves in situations where the majority could play and a small group couldn't. The Pac-12 faces the biggest questions. The leaders of California and Oregon seem to have familiar mindsets, and if teams in those states aren't capable of playing, that would take out half the league. This week, reports surfaced that Alabama was seeking a potential opponent should USC, Southern Cal, not be able to play in the scheduled season opener in Arlington, Texas. The reports indicated TCU, which is scheduled to play Cal in Week 1, might be a fill-in opponent if the game against the Bears falls through. So they could play each other if California doesn't open up So what does the word open mean? When Power 5 commissioners had the conference call with Vice President Mike Pence in April, the main takeaway was that there would be no college sports if there was no college. So we took that to mean that there would be no college sports if students weren't on campus receiving instruction. So we've learned in the weeks since that to the people who run college sports, the definition of that word open is highly negotiable. That was more obvious after Tuesday's announcement by the California State University system that it would hold online classes for most of its almost 500,000 students this fall. The Cal State system is different from the University of California system, which includes UCLA and Cal, but it does include FBS schools San Diego State, San Jose State, and Fresno State. Hours after that announcement, the presidents of the three schools and Mountain West Commissioner Craig Thompson released this statement. Certainly all conversations are led by academics, as well as public health and safety. Within that framework, more determinations are necessary. All three institutions will work closely with the Mountain West. No decision on athletics have been made. So this came out 3 weeks after Thompson interview said that unless we're in full mode with dormitories and housing and all the other facilities are open, we won't have college athletics. Thompson has some wiggle room there because he didn't say classes need to be in person. The consensus among conference officials now seems to be that as long as parts of campuses are open, even if many students are taking classes remotely, that is open enough to consider playing sports. Now here's a biggie. Can schools pull off the testing required? No one is quite sure how frequent testing will cost for a football team and staff because of the cost of tests. For the active disease and for antibodies that would indicate a previous infection keeps dropping as more come on the market. One athletic director told The Athletic on Thursday that he expects a six-figure cost, and he couldn't get more specific because the numbers keep changing. Coaches and administrators point out the relatively low risk of death for the age group that contains the players, but some coaches and staffers do fall within a more at-risk populations. The fact that football is a contact sport with easy potential for one person to shed virus onto another means one undetected infection could become a lot of infections very quickly. So administrators are trying to develop testing protocols now that would be enforced when players return. In some cases, this may match what their universities are doing. UC San Diego, for example, must begin a program to allow 5,000 students currently living on campus to self-administer nasal swab tests so that the disease can be tracked and traced and infected students can be quarantined to avoid the virus. Because of this potential valuable data, schools might be willing to help their athletic departments with the testing. Many of the FBS schools would have medical schools and all have student health centers that would love to collect as much data as possible about the disease and testing services. So these are just some of the questions. We have other questions saying about the fans, which I'm pretty sure fans are not going to be there this year. What happens if a player tests positive? And then, of course, the big one, which is, will college football be played as scheduled? I said about a month ago it might be a little too early to talk about college football, but with the 6-week time window that the coaches mentioned, we need to come up with a decision in the next month or so. So it's coming up. We need to figure out something coming up. But coming up here, we'll talk about the NFL trying to force NFL owners into a diversity conversation. We'll talk about that when we come back.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
So we have a strange situation going on in the NFL where the NFL wants to incentivize the hiring of minority head coaches or general managers to solve an NFL diversity problem. So this kind of came up during the latest coaching searches where you had the the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs. He got looked over for a bunch of coaching jobs, which he probably deserved more than the people that got him. So there's a huge issue with that. You have the Rooney Rule already in place, which is you have to interview at least one minority candidate. Some coaches feel like they just get interviewed because of that. So it's kind of backfired a little bit. But the NFL put out a proposal to do just that, to try to incentivize hiring a minority head coach or general manager. They proposed this in front of team owners during they're putting a proposal together for their meeting with the owners next week, and it will force a conversation among the NFL's most powerful decision makers that is long overdue. The NFL can no longer deny that it does indeed have a diversity problem, as the number of minority head coaches and general managers continues to dwindle. The league leads into the 2020 season with just 4 minority head coaches, down from 8 in 2018. They have 2 African-American general managers, and the most recent hiring cycle resulted in 1 new diverse hire, which is Cleveland general manager Andrew Berry. Washington head coach Ron Rivera was in the same role in Carolina last year, so that doesn't count. It's clear the Rooney Rule, which requires teams to interview at least 1 minority candidate for those upper-level job openings, isn't working out as intended, despite attempts to improve its effectiveness in recent years. Punishments for the Rooney Rule violations, usually in the form of fines to the franchise, haven't worked either. So now the NFL is going to at least consider the opposite. Teams that hire non-white head coaches, general managers, or both can improve their draft status. According to a report from NBA Media's Jim Trotter, owners next week during a meeting that will be held via video conference will, for the first time, consider implementing incentives for hiring and maintaining diversity at the top of their organizations. Teams that hire a minority head coach would climb 6 spots in the 3rd round in the following year's draft. They move up 10 spots in the 3rd round for hiring a minority general manager, and 16 spots for filling both vacancies with minority candidates. Now, don't know how they're just going to give them spots. That means you're taking a spot from someone else. They have to switch with someone else. Don't know how that's going to go. But teams could have their draft status improve in the 4th round of a subsequent draft if the minority coach lasted into his 3rd season. That may be a reactionary move to the firings after the 2018 season of Arizona Steve Wilkes, who was replaced by Cliff Kingsbury. After 1 season of Denver's Vance Joseph. Steve Wilkes was fired after 1 year. Vance Joseph from Denver was fired after 2. The proposal comes about 4 months after Commissioner Roger Goodell admitted during his annual pre-Super Bowl news conference that we need to change and do something different. And after Fritz Pollard Alliance held 2 meetings at the Senior Bowl and during the NFL Combine to discuss ways to improve the hiring process for minority candidates. Rod Graves, executive director of the Fritz Pollard Alliance and the former general manager of the Arizona Cardinals, said Friday that his organization has had multiple discussions with the league and knew it was considering incentives, but it was not part of crafting the proposal. The fact that these and other initiatives will be discussed to me is a very positive and strong sign that this issue is recognized and is treated as an important issue for the NFL, Graves said. If they are thinking along these lines and showing this sort of creative effort to really advance to improve numbers, we applaud that effort. Still, it is far from perfect. At first glance, the part of the proposal that improves mid-round draft pick status seems to be insulting in that teams must be coerced into finally committing to diversity, while also not nearly providing incentive enough for owners to change their hiring habits. So, would the Cardinals really have decided to keep Wilkes just to move up a few spots in the 4th round of the draft 2 years later? Would the Raiders have conducted an open job search and hired someone other than John Gruden to get an earlier pick in the 3rd round? If multiple teams are so willing to pass over Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy, one of just 2 African-American offensive coordinators last year during the hiring cycle, in which a special teams coordinator, Joe Judge, and college head coach Matt Rule landed jobs, it's hard to believe such an incentive would change their minds. There's an additional, albeit less polarizing part of the proposal that owners will consider that could help diversify the coaching pipeline. Owners who will vote on removing the rule that allows teams to bar their assistant coaches from interviewing to be coordinators for other teams. the idea is that if more minority candidates interview and are subsequently hired as coordinators, the pool of qualified head coaching candidates will become more diverse. There are only a few opportunities every year for assistants to improve and have a chance to grow into coordinators. If this opens the door wider for those opportunities, we would support that, Graves said. So, under such a proposal, teams that lose a minority assistant coach to a coordinator job would receive a fifth-round compensatory pick. If that assistant coach or assistant personnel executive becomes a head coach or a general manager, the team would receive a third-round pick. Incentives would also be added for teams hiring a minority quarterbacks coach. Owners will also consider a proposal to expand the Rooney Rule to cover coordinator positions and increase the minimum number of minority candidates from 1 to 2. It is a lot for owners to consider, and it seems unlikely that the overall proposal will pass next week, the first opportunity for owners to discuss it. The incentivization of minority hiring is such a dramatic change from current policy, albeit one that is effective, and the league can be slow to embrace any sort of sweeping social change. The conversation will likely be uncomfortable, and it should be, as owners who in a vacuum can defend their own individual hiring practices will have to look at their actions as a whole. Even if it doesn't pass, other proposals should follow because the system as it exists is broken. So, it's strange. It is strange that we have to incentivize owners to even think about this. That is strange. That is insane to me. That we have to incentivize owners to even do such things. The NFL does have a problem. There's nepotism everywhere, where if you're a coach's son, you can get a job with no prior experience. If you know a certain coach, you can get hired somewhere. The Cliff Kingsbury, the Sean McVay effect. After Sean McVay lit the world on fire a couple years ago, all of his buddies got hired. Stuff like that. There is an issue, and I'm not really sure if this is going to be the way to fix it, even if it does get passed, which it's not going to get passed. I'm just putting that out there. It's not going to get passed. But I don't know how it would actually affect things. I don't know how the going 10 spots up in the third round, I don't know how that would work. But it is nice to know that the NFL is trying to incentivize these owners to commit to this, although it is laughable that we have to incentivize them to do something like this. It's terrible, in my opinion, that these owners pretty much have to be incentivized to even look at a minority hire in some positions. But this article is correct. I mean, you have Cliff Kingsbury, who had a losing record at Texas Tech. He gets hired. You have Matt Rule, who's never coached in the NFL. To be fair, he was very successful in college, so I give that one more of a pass. Then, of course, you have the special teams coordinator from the Patriots getting the job at the Giants. But to be fair, playing devil's advocate, he did have a Bill Belichick seal of approval. But those guys are getting jobs over Eric Bieniemy, who's been in the league for a while. He's an offensive coordinator. He was offensive coordinator for the Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs. That kind of stuff. Then you had Wilkes, who was fired after only 1 year, so they could hire Cliff Kingsbury. That always rubbed me the wrong way. Just stuff like that. I mean, Brian Flores, he's in Florida. He's in Miami right now. Miami had a pretty rough year. They're actually looking to be pretty good, and they had a pretty good turnaround last year. So hopefully he sticks around as well. I mean, other than Mike Tomlin, you don't really have anybody who's consistently there in the minority category. So I hate that we have to force owners to do it, but you kind of have to do it. You kind of have to. When we come back, though, we will do our draft review of the Miami Dolphins. We'll see how their draft went past Tua Tagovailoa and what they're going to do to better their future. So, Brian Flores. Wow, what a transition when we come back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and One Championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
So the Miami Dolphins, they had the 5th pick in the NFL draft, and there was a lot of speculation, maybe a little smoke throwing from the Miami Dolphins, whether or not they were going to get Tua Tagovailoa, or they were going to get Justin Herbert, or they were going to get not a quarterback in general. But the 2020 draft was one of the most important drafts in Miami's history. General Manager Chris Grier and head coach Brian Flores went into the draft with 14 picks after 2019 season saw them clean the house. They had a gutted roster. Fans waited on pins and needles to see who the players were that would change the franchise. So early in the offseason, Dolphins decided to change course by hiring longtime offensive coordinator Chan Gailey. And during free agency, Grier went hard on defense by bringing in a slew of players that kicked off with the blockbuster signing of Byron Jones. They have a new coordinator and fresh faces. It was clear the Dolphins had a theme. They were going to play defense and run the ball down teams' throats. So, let's see if the draft continued with that theme. So, of course, round 1, pick 5, Tua Tagovailoa. In the minds of most fans, it was Tua or bust. Wasn't a doubt in anyone's mind that he was the target pick from the start of the 2019 season. He was projected to be number 1 pick before the rise of Joe Burrow and a devastating hip injury. So, of course, you have the injury history, but the Dolphins have a plan in place. They brought back Ryan Fitzpatrick to tutor the rookie as he continues to heal. In return, the Fins are getting an immensely accurate passer. There's not a level on the field he can't hit with pinpoint precision. He's an excellent mover in the pocket with good pocket awareness and escapability. His biggest issue, as noted by Nick Saban, is that he tries to extend plays a little too much. He puts his body on the line a little too much. He wants to make a play too much, which is not a bad thing, except when it comes to injuries, because most of his injuries came on plays where he could have just thrown the ball away. They came on plays where he was rolling out, and just plays he didn't need to have the ball in his hand. So, next pick, Austin Jackson, offensive tackle from Southern Cal. The Miami Dolphins needed a blindside protector. This isn't about their future. It isn't just about their future. Ryan Fitzpatrick got destroyed last season, spent a lot of time in the dirt. Offensive line was terrible, but trading away a top left tackle would do that. There was a run on tackles early, and the Dolphins didn't look to move up. Chris Grier stayed at number 18 and selected Austin Jackson. It's easy to see why the Dolphins fell in love with Jackson. He's 6'5", 322 pounds with jaw-dropping athleticism, good mover with quick feet, and a great kickback. The major problem was the desperate need of an edge rusher, and Kayvon Chaisson was on the board. There was also a better prospect, a plug-and-play guard, Cesar Ruiz, available. Jackson's a bit of a project at left tackle who lacks the ideal strength or power at the point of attack. Round 1, pick 30, Noah Igbinogin, cornerback, Auburn. They were not in position to be picky with prospects. They needed guys who could help come in and contribute right away. Picking the best player available seemed like a reasonable strategy, especially after trading down from number 26 to 30. There were some excellent prospects available, especially at running back and safety positions, but Grier decided to bolster the secondary by taking this guy. I can't say his name. Sorry. There's one word to describe him: explosiveness. He has a stocky build with excellent strength at the line of scrimmage. He presses and brings tenacity the Miami Dolphins are looking for. His play style is in sync with Byron Jones and Xavier Howard's physicality. He can line up on the outside in certain packages. This was a reach considering the talent left on the board, though. Next up, round 2, pick 39, Robert Hunt, offensive line from Louisiana. No doubt the Dolphins would try to build a wall for their future quarterback Anyone following the team could tell you that their offensive line was terrible, their running game was ineffective, cringeworthy, and laughable. So, their leading rusher in 2019 was Ryan Fitzpatrick with 243 yards, which is bad. Any wise team with a ton of picks, the Fins addresses their putrid interior play. Louisiana interior lineman Robert Hunt is the rookie who will work alongside Austin Jackson to help change the attitude up front. Next, round 2, pick 56, Raekwon Davis, defensive line from Alabama. When a team is 5-11, there aren't many bright spots, and the run defense isn't it either. So the Dolphins went into the draft looking to bolster their run defense, which gave up an average of 134 yards per game. They lacked power against the run, and a player like Raekwon Davis can help with that. This is the second year in a row Miami Dolphins use a high draft pick on the defensive line. Last season they drafted Christian Wilkins, who's more of an interior rusher. So is Davon Godchaux. Davis is a perfect complement to the two players thanks to his powerful playing style. Round 2, pick 70. They have so many freaking picks. Holy cow. Brandon Jones, safety from Texas. Earlier in the draft, Dolphins addressed the secondary by taking a corner when many thought they'd try to replace Minkah Fitzpatrick. After Dolphins opted to pass on the top safeties, things started to look bleak in terms of drafting one with starter potential. That was until they drafted Brandon Jones. He's 5'11", 200-pound safety, does his best work as a downfield defender, plays like an old-school thumper, a missile looking to make hard-hitting impact. He has great range and a burst when attacking the run game. Again, the Dolphins' inability to stop the run likely contributed to this pick. However, the issue is that he doesn't have the ideal frame for that type of playing style. Additionally, there isn't a ton of room for that type of safety. He has solid range and ball skills. He doesn't have the instincts and coverage ability you want for a starting safety. Round 4, pick 111, Solomon Kinley, offensive line for Georgia. Building depth through the draft is a smart strategy by any team. Getting players that specializes in one thing makes it possible for guys to stick around. That's what the Dolphins did with their 111 pick, 111th pick, with University Georgia offensive lineman Solomon Kinley. Unfortunately, they neglected to address their lackluster pass rusher at this point, which hurt their grade. With that said, based on the addition of Jordan Howard and the players they selected earlier in the draft, taking a player like Kinley does make sense. For starters, he has a massive frame, standing at 6'3", weighing 337 pounds. The former Georgia lineman is a mauler in the run game. Once he gets his hands on defenders, he's in control. He has decent feet, but he's not a mover. Nothing about his playing style screams athlete, but he does one thing well, and that's playing with power. Round 5, pick 154, Jason Strobridge, defense tackle, North Carolina. Chris Greer doubled down on the defensive line with another guy who plays the run well with North Carolina's Jason Strobridge. In some ways, he's similar to Raekwon Davis, who the Fins drafted earlier. Both players specialize in run defense with some athletic upside. The former North Carolina defensive lineman made a name for himself at the Senior Bowl. He earned praise for his athleticism and ability to get skinny and slip past guards when lined up in the 3 technique. 6'4", 275 pounds, solid length and good play strength, solid athlete but not a great bender. However, he showed off his speed at the 2020 NFL Scouting Combine. Round 5, pick 164, Curtis Weaver, edge, Boise State. So, we have a pass rusher in the 5th round. Chris Weaver was a Senior Bowl standout who capitalized off a 13.5 sack season. The result of his work earned himself a Day 2 consideration, but whatever. The NFL obviously thought differently, and it worked out well for Miami Dolphins. The former Boise State edge rusher has excellent hands and feet when rushing the passer. He's quick, solid burst off the edge. He has a hard punch, and he at his best when he's countering tackles. His high motor and ability to disrupt using his hand quickness and technique aids in his ability to impact the running and passing game. This is a steal for the Dolphins in the 5th round. Round 6, pick 185, the best pick in the draft! Blake Ferguson, long snapper, LSU. He's a long snapper. I can't tell you much about a long snapper. Round 7, pick 246, Malcolm Perry, quarterback/wide receiver from Navy. With the final 2 picks, teams are looking for camp bodies and special teams. The Miami Dolphins opted to take a guy who provides the Fins with some uniqueness from an offensive perspective by selecting Malcolm Perry. What comes to mind is the way the Saints use Taysom Hill, which I feel like I've seen that phrase billions of times in the past weeks, especially with Jalen Hurts getting drafted and stuff like that. But anyways, despite his size, he rushed for 2,000 yards thanks to his tenacity and ability to fight for extra yards. He has decent hands, can be dangerous after the catch thanks to his open field vision. On special teams, he averaged just over 24 yards per turn. That's something the Finns can use. He'll compete for a spot on special teams, and with his grit, don't be surprised if he makes the final cut. So there you have it. That is the Miami Dolphins. So basically, they got their guy with Tua Tagovailoa. Then they doubled down. They got 3 offensive linemen. They got a bunch of defensive linemen and bolstered their secondary as well. So they added a lot of depth, and they improved that offensive line tremendously to help with Ryan Fitzpatrick and help with Tua Tagovailoa here. So I think this is a great draft. Supposedly it's the most important draft in Miami Dolphins history. I think they did a fantastic job. But I hope I did a fantastic job, even though we struggled with the soccer topic. I think I did a fantastic job on this week's episode, this Sunday's episode. So we have another episode on Tuesday. Thank you for watching, everybody. If you like the podcast, like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow me on Twitter at Strickland_Josh. I'll talk to y'all on Tuesday. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.